They've written a great book called Super Genes, Dr. Deepak Chopra and Dr. Rudolph Tanzi. Dr. Chopra needs no introductions. He's written more books, been on more television, done more things about healthy living with more interesting, unique, and occasionally even controversial theories. Dr. Tanzi comes from the Harvard. Need I say more? You know, it's and together you've written a book. Is this your first book you've written together?
This is our second book.
Second, okay.
Book, yeah.
I've done my homework, obviously. But actually, I have read the book. I was fascinated by it. My wife, who's a retina surgeon, is already tired of hearing from me about it. And I want to talk to you about it. And the first is, it's called Super Genes, but actually you talk about epigenetics. Could you explain, first of all, what epigenetics is?
Do you want to go first?
Epigenetics, epi means onto, and the idea is that when you engage in certain lifestyle activities with a frequency that becomes a habit or a routine, that gene activity actually gets programmed semi-permanently because chemicals actually modify the genes and keep them firing, keep them active in a certain way. So it says that your lifestyle directly programs your genes. That can be good habits, good gene programs, bad habits, bad gene programs. This is relatively new information that you can actually wire your genes based on your lifestyle in a semi-permanent fashion.
And the way you change the expression of your genes can be transferred to the next generation, at least in animal models. But we believe that that's also true for all mammals because we have similar genes, you know, so since 80% of your genes are the same as a mouse, and what applies to other species applies to us. But it is not only about epigenetics, it's also about the interaction between your genes, epigenetic programs, and the microbiome.
I want to get to that.
Okay.
I want to stick on epigenetics 1 second. 'Cause
Okay.
This is fundamental. Because all of us here were raised with the concept that the genes we're born with are the genes we die with. And you're saying that's not true.
Well, the same genes, and unless you do CRISPR-Cas editing, you're not going to change the gene sequence itself. You're going to keep the same genes. But what matters most for health is the activity or the expression of those genes. And your lifestyle directly is regulating their expression. And whatever you do most frequently, where there's a habit or a routine or something that has a very high intensity, like a traumatic event, can cause chemical modifications to keep genes active in a certain way, whole programs of hundreds or thousands of genes at once. So now there are pharmaceutical companies. Biogen just bought a biotech company for $500 million yesterday that's making drugs that reprogram genes epigenetically. So this is here to stay. It's going to be the next big generation of drugs coming out for disease. I mean, you can predict that they would inherit the same epigenetic modifications that allowed that goat to adapt, but it wasn't looked at. So, but there was a study in mice that was fascinating where mice were trained to be afraid of the smell of cherry. So every time the mouse would smell cherry, these were male mice, they would give it a little shock to the foot of the mouse. I don't do these experiments, but I like mice. But basically, a little shock to the foot. So now whenever the mouse smells cherry, it's trained to start quivering in the corner of the cage. Then they look at the baby mice born from that male, and these are mice just born, and they expose them to the cherry smell, and they quiver in the corner. They were never trained to be afraid of it. They look in the DNA, they seem to say the same epigenetic modifications in the father were in the baby mice, meaning that they inherited a new trait that the father basically was conditioned for as an adult.
I wanted to get this out there because so this is now accepted science. Epigenetics is real.
Yeah.
You guys didn't discover and invent it. That's not really even the main point of your book. But the point in part is that there are genes, and they're important, and we spend a lot of time studying them, but we've learned a lot, and the science is changing. But there's also, you spend a lot of time talking about what's in your gut. Tell us about that and why it's important.
So in your gut is what is called the microbiome, but it's also in your skin, it's also in all the orifices of your body, and there are 10 times more microbial cells in your body than there are human cells. So technically speaking, you're all a few human cells hanging on to a bacterial colony. When you count the genes of these bacteria, it's 150 times more genes that are of microbial origin than of human origin. So, and we acquire these when we are born, as we come out of the birth canal and through the bonding with the family, etc. So there's a horizontal transmission and a vertical transmission. The microbiome is your second genome. It's actually probably more important than the genes that you acquired from your parents. And it responds to things like sleep, diet, food. So if your food is contaminated with steroids or chemicals or pesticides, probably GMO or insecticides or anything that's given to animals in production of animals like antibiotics and hormones, then the ecosystem of your microbiome, which is the first thing that comes into contact with your food, will get disrupted. And what we call supergenes is the integrated activity of the microbiome, the human genome, and epigenetics. So this is a very important area right now to look at how the microbiome influences your well-being. It's not only food, but stress, sleep, meditation, exercise, yoga, breathing techniques, emotions, all affect the microbiome.
And if I might add, the two most important things you can argue that the microbiome control are inflammation in the body, and there's also something called the gut-brain axis. So the bacteria, and whether they're healthy in your gut, directly control mood, energy level, and even inflammation in your brain, which is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So we're actually doing experiments trying to treat Alzheimer's in mice for now by managing their gut microbiome.
So when you say I have a gut feeling about such and such, you're not speaking metaphorically, you're speaking literally. In fact, you can probably trust your gut feelings a little more because they haven't yet learned how to doubt their own feelings.
So in the last 48 hours, we've seen the CEOs of IBM, Intel, and Samsung on the big keynote stage talking about devices which measure a lot of your physical attributes. There's even a partnership IBM announced with Under Armour. And so you could track yourself over time. How do those things play into what you're talking about? And tracking and getting feedback and what you eat and the calories you burn and your exercise and your sleep.
So to talk about how we might in the future be through immersive environments, be actually programming our genes.
Well, two of the biggest risk factors as we age for our brain and for our body is stress and inflammation. And stress causes inflammation largely through the microbiome, as we're learning. So for managing stress, I would say virtual reality, using this as a tool to somehow quell agitation, treat depression. This is going to be very powerful, and we'll be able to quantify the effects by looking at epigenetics, looking at changes in the entire genome and gene activity. So this is where it's going, is correlating remote sensing of various, blood pressure, heart rate variability, and correlating that with changes at the genetic level, and then asking, what can we do with virtual reality to actually make ourselves healthier, managing stress, helping with sleep, even helping with diet, and other things.
So Gary, one thing I think most people don't know is that and I didn't know this till I got to hang out with this guy, only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant, which means there's a 1-to-1 ratio with the mutation and the disease. 95% are influenced by other factors.
Factors being stress, diet, exercise, things like that.
Yes.
Emotional state.
Emotional state.
Well, could you help us out? So 10 years from now, what do you expect to see in wellness and healthcare using technology that we do not have today?
Well, I think first we need the integration of all these technologies. Because when you integrate all these technologies, you realize that your mind, your brain, your body, your gene expression, epigenetics, microbiome, immune system is one system. It's not many different systems, and it's an integrated system. So in medical school, we never learned about the healing system, but that's the fundamental system to which all these systems are subservient. So what I see 10 years from now is, with the exception of those 5% of disease-related gene mutations which are fully penetrant, for which we'll need new drugs based on how to stop those expressions, 95% of chronic illness will be something that technology and bioregulation, not biofeedback, but bioregulation will help us not only prevent, and I'll go on the limb and say maybe Rudy won't go on the limb, but I'm used to doing that, that we'll be able to not only prevent these diseases, reverse them. So what we're seeing is an era of personalized medicine, which is participatory, which is preventive, which is reversible, and which is process-oriented. And it's all here in one little device.
That sounds great. You want to add anything?
I would just add that we'll be using remote sensing and what we call quantification of self as a way to also look for the warning signs, biomarkers that disease is coming long before symptoms, before cognitive symptoms appear. So to get a better idea of whether you're on your way to disease, this will tell you whether lifestyle interventions or pharmaceuticals or even non-invasive therapies using electromagnetic, so big push now on electromagnetic type therapies. So the combination of these will be used to prevent disease before it strikes. Remote sensing will allow us, even VR,
We thought of the body as a physical structure in all biofield where every has one important breakthrough in just the way we think of the body. Molecular biology took us to one level, and now we're going to go to the next level. Energy, information, and dare I say consciousness.
How about aging?
Well, we know that the biological markers of aging like blood pressure, bone density, body temperature regulation, hormone levels, immune function are all variable. They don't correspond to your chronological age. And we now have a study looking at telomerase, which is the enzyme that regulates the length of your genes. You want to share with Gary our findings on the telomerase and gene expression study?
Well, we're looking at the effects of meditation and quantifying effects of meditation on gene activities, on inflammation, biomarkers for Alzheimer's, and also telomerase. And with a 1-week intervention of meditation as a clinical trial, the telomerase activity, the anti-aging enzyme, went up 40%, which was totally shocking to us. We never thought we'd get such a result. And when we looked at gene activities after a meditation trial for a week, we saw that genes involved with inflammation were quelled, genes involved with wound healing were also affected, genes for viral infections. In other words, the body was chilling out and saying, we don't need to turn on these genes that they're trying to help us. So it led to a healthier genetic state. Beyond our wildest dreams, we never thought we'd get results so strong. And that paper is now under review and should be published soon.
It's because you say that the 95% of diseases are produced by lifestyle. So you say that it's most important food and exercise and these things.
So to a large extent, prevention and treatment are the same. In Alzheimer's disease, we don't call it Alzheimer's until you see symptoms of dementia. But the disease began 20 years before. The pathology was already in the brain. Tumor, you say you have cancer, you don't wait for the symptoms. Well, it's the same. We don't say it for Alzheimer's because you don't want to say you have Alzheimer's disease if there's no dementia. There's a social stigma that might come with that. But the fact is, the pathology is accumulating 20 years before. That's when you start treating the disease. You could call that prevention of symptoms. But prevention of symptoms of a disease that starts 20 years before is still treatment. So it's going to become more of a word issue that a lot of diseases that are age-related begin way before symptoms. And prevention is actually just treating the disease before symptoms.